What we're going to do is, this is a first a diabetes chat where we're now going to hand over to James and he's going to do a presentation. It's going to be on the essentials of FreeStyle Libre. And we'll head over to you, James, and you can head up our next section, your presentation.
Yeah, hi guys again. So this is I guess a short chat around the essentials of Libre. So I've put the first part of 4 on my profile, and it's got a hashtag DiabetesChat on there. So the first part is there's the nice start, which is just says welcome to this short presentation tutorial about FreeStyle Libre. Yeah, so the first bit is what is the difference between Flash and CGM? So the Flash is known as intermittent scanning CGM. So that could be the things such as the FreeStyle Libre. And then you have the other one is the real-time CGM, which is Dexcom. And you may be thinking, well, what does one do? What does another one do? And they both basically aim to do the same thing. So the Flash requires the person to scan and the CGM does not, basically. But they aim to both give similar data. The next one is what are the benefits from using FreeStyle Libre? So my experience around FreeStyle, obviously I've supported patients using it, but I've also supported around the education that we've done with Eden. So I produced some e-learning materials, some infographics and things. And based on the evidence that we've looked at, it ultimately helps to reduce the risk for hospital admission, particularly around DKA and severe hypos. It has sort of a neutral but also a reduced effect on HbA1c, more of a reduced effect on HbA1c from those who have a higher baseline HbA1c. So that means prior to the use of Libre, for those that had higher HbA1cs, generally had a bigger drop as well. It also showed improvements in quality of life in most of them who used it. Other studies showed sometimes a raised HbA1c for those that are more older and more frail, and that was around prioritizing the risk of hypoglycemia. There was also another study, I think a Belgium study, that found increase in work rates and less absences from work as well. The next one, I think that's the first part done. Yeah, I'm just having a look to see. Oh no, I missed the one after it saying what is Flash. So we mentioned that it's an intermittently scanned CGM, but it continuously measures the sensor glucose data. So there is a sensor on that is usually placed on the back of the arms, and other studies have found reasonable data that compared arms to, I think, stomach, and they found quite fairly reliability. But in order for that data to be obtained as a CGM, the person needs to scan it at least every 8 hours. And the advice is the more scan you do, the better your time in range is. Okay, so I'm just going to upload this part 2. So it's just, I think it's now sent. So you're literally seeing everything that I'm doing live right now. So the first one is, what is the difference between a sensor glucose and a blood glucose? The sensor glucose basically reads the amount of glucose in the interstitial fluid. This is also known as the ISF. It basically means the ISF is where the cells are. It's the fluid surrounding it. So it's the glucose that's picked up there. And obviously blood glucose, we know it's a finger prick reading that measures the amount of glucose that's in the blood as well. Then that in itself can lead to the question of why is there a time lag, and this is the exact reason. And the way that I would inform patients is that it's like a train. So imagine that the front of the train is your blood glucose, and then the next carriage along is your sensor glucose. So when everything is stable and flat, generally the blood glucose and the sensor glucose will be going at a similar rate. But when you're going up a hill, when your glucose level is rising, what you'll find is that the blood glucose goes up first and then the sensor glucose follows. And the quicker the rate of change is, then you'll find that the difference, there's more of a time lag. But as the technology is advancing, the time lag has considerably got less and less and less as well. So when you are in a hypo, generally for the patients, I try and advise them to say, whilst you're in a hypo, you might want to just revert back to blood glucose monitoring to prevent yourselves from over treating your hypo as well, because you might recheck, go by that sensor glucose, and it's still reading under 4, but in fact your blood glucose has gone up and responded quicker, and then it's caused you to be above 4, so then you don't over-treat it as well. So who can access the FreeStyle Libre? So access depends on where you are in the world. So I'm not sure what it's like in America. In the UK, in terms of NICE, then we know that the guidance recently updated. So type 1 diabetes, it's access of either Flash or CGM for all. For type 2, it's offer access to Flash if the individual is using 2 or more injections of insulin, unless the person requires support to monitor their blood glucose levels using insulin, then they can access Flash. Or real-time CGM can also be used if the device is to the same cost or equivalent to the same cost as a Flash glucose monitor as well. So how do you use it? So you'll see on the screen as well. So that's one of my profiles during the past few days whilst on pump. What can you see? So basically, the first thing, the sensor itself, we know it lasts for 14 days, though if it comes off, then obviously it lasts a bit less. Each scan itself lasts for 8 hours. And when you do a scan, you'll see that glucose level, you see the trend arrow, and you'll see the trend line for the past 8 hours as well. So you may be wondering, what is a trend arrow itself? So the simple answer is it's a feature that indicates the glucose direction. So the high means it's rising fast. So it's generally, I think it's more than 1.5 millimoles in 15 minutes. If it's a diagonally rising arrow, it means it is rising, but not as quickly as if it's rising fast. So I think around 0.8 in 15 minutes. And then if it's going kind of steady, so if it's a sideways arrow, it's meaning it's not staying the same, it's changing, but it's at a slow change. If it's going diagonally downward, it's doing the opposite effect, so it's falling, and if it's straight down, it's falling fast as well. And the way we use trend arrows is really important, particularly around hypoglycemia. So there's a rule we say, if it's the levels between 4 and 6, so what are we saying with that one? That is 36 and I'm not sure. If it's just above the hypo range, then you can do preventative actions. So we say if it's a diagonally downward arrow, take 5 grams of carbs. And if it's a straight down arrow, take 10 grams of carbs. And that's like, are you driving in the middle of the motorway and you turning off or going down near the side barrier in the wheel? And that's the action of the using those trend arrows as well. So this is part 3. So there's only 4. So what can you scan the sensor with are the next one? So there are kind of 3 main things. So there's a reader, but there is a worldwide shortage. Particularly in the UK, there's a shortage, which is why they developed or had a decision made to develop the A5X, which is a company called NUU that made it. And then obviously there's the phone device that you can use with the Libre Link app. With the reader, we know you need to connect the device to a computer and manually upload it to LibreView. With the phone device, there's a Libre Link app, and it will automatically upload to the data to LibreView. With the A5X, you first have to have the device connected to a Wi-Fi area, and then you go out and do your normal day-to-day thing. And then when you're back in a Wi-Fi area that's connected to the app, it will then upload automatically. But the devices show you much more than just the scan itself. It will show you useful data, graphs, and includes time and range. So you may be wondering, well, what is time and range? Simple percentage of time spent within a set glucose target range. So generally the consensus for continuous glucose monitoring technology, which the link is in that particular part of the tweet thread, for adults it's between 3.9 to 10. For during pregnancy, it's between 3.5 to 7.8, and that particularly came from the concept trial, which identified better neonatal outcomes and better pregnancy outcomes for people within that set range using CGM as well. Basically, the more time spent in target range, the better it helps to reduce the risk of complications, and that's been found in the previous trials and evidence that's done. So you're wondering, well, how much time percentage is required? So the gold standard for adults with type 1 and type 2 is 70%. So that's between 3.9 to 10 or if you're using milligrams per deciliter, it's 70 to 180. For hypos, it's less than 4%, below 3.9. And then for pregnancy, it's the same again, but with those different thresholds. If someone's high risk, then it's slightly different. So that'd be someone particularly who's older and more frail, then it's generally around 50% of the target in range, but less than 1% of that target in hypoglycemia itself. So you may be wondering about the new alerts that are coming in. So very similar to kind of Dexcom, these have alerts in place now. FreeStyle Libre 1 hasn't, FreeStyle Libre 2 has. The cost is same with FreeStyle Libre 1 and 2. So if you're not on the FreeStyle Libre 2, then ask your clinician to get you onto it, or prescribe you it, or get the GP to prescribe it, because there's no cost implications as well. So with the FreeStyle Libre 2, there's a high and the low alert as well. And a really good place to go to know where to set these alerts is the DTN UK website. They have an algorithm setting low alerts, and they have an algorithm for setting high alerts as well. And the aim with the alerts is they need to be an action where you do something. It's not there to be something that constantly goes off. It needs to be set high enough where it's an unusual place, and then you know you need to take an action such as a correction dose. With the low alerts, you may want to use them either at a point where you're definitely going to make an intervention. Sometimes you might want to adjust them, particularly the low alerts I do when I'm doing physical activity. I'll set them a bit higher, so it allows me to be aware of them a bit quicker as well. I mentioned a bit about LibreView, which brings on to the next bit, which wonders, well, what is LibreView? And it's something that you need to be set up on if you're using the Libre. So if you're using Dexcom, it would be Dexcom Clarity. And both are basically cloud-based systems that allows glucose data transfers them into reports, and that both you and your healthcare professional can look at anytime, anywhere. However, reviewing and understanding the reports can be, I guess, quite difficult because there's so many, and it can feel, I guess, quite confusing. And it's, how do you understand those reports? That's, I guess, the main thing. It can be overwhelming seeing so many reports. So my advice is see the ones that you find are most helpful to you and get used to it as well. So the way we say when we're reviewing is to look at things in 6 steps, and 6 steps only. And that will help you to understand the data, whether you're using Libre or Clarity, and it will help you to find a strategy to help improve your time in range. So firstly, as we mentioned, reports. There are many different reports on LibreView and Clarity, and it can feel overwhelming, which is why we would suggest you use only a few reports. So the key ones that I would use during my consultations is the AGP report, snapshot, and the daily report or the weekly report. They are particularly useful as well. And the AGP profile for Dexcom is very useful. Dexcom has a bit more good functionalities in identifying patterns, which I find are really useful. So in terms of the 6 steps, the first one is the data reliable? So without having reliable data, then you're not going to make a good assumption, you're not going to make a good identification on what patterns there are and what things to do. So the standard is to have at least 95% scan data collected. So if you're scanning every 8 hours, you'll have 100% of data. However, doing it precisely at every 8 hours is quite hard. So the more the scanning, the better. And more scanning helps to improve outcomes as well. And I think there's a saying, Pratik says, scanning more buys more time in range as well, and it helps to improve glycemic variability. So generally do more than 8 scans a day is good. Obviously with CGM, you haven't got to worry about that, but you've got to make sure that you're still connected as well. So make sure you check in your Bluetooth and stuff. So it's really important that this is first achieved in order to identify how reliable the data is, understanding what kind of patterns we can make. So you'll see that's my image of 100%. And sometimes it's this that you need to kind of start off with. So I had a patient in clinic just Friday, and they had about 6% scan data. So obviously very little. And there was I wouldn't be able to make a safe suggestion to them. So I said, well, first thing we need to do is just basically try and scan a bit more often. They were doing about 2 scans a day. So I said, try in the morning and do in the evening if you can, and we'll go from there. And sometimes it's just going right back to basics and going from there. So the next step is for you, and what I say as well, is to think of something positive. So what's going well? What have you done well? It could be something it could be big or small, doesn't matter. So are you scanning more? Are you enjoying the Libre? Has your time below range come down? Has your time in range gone up? It's basically a way of making you feel good about what you're doing, because it's one thing to live with diabetes, but it's another thing to try and do you best you can with it, basically. Step 3 is to then look at the lows. So aim is to have less than 4% for adults and less than 1% for those that are high risk. If your time below range is too high, you want to understand the cause. Is your carb count and ratio correct? Are your injection sites, particularly if you change to a healthier site, is that all okay? Yeah, what are the main issues there? If your time below range is more than 10%, this is something we should prioritize. And the way I say it to my patients is, if we sort this out, get the time below range down, that will just go hopefully straight into your time in range as well. Once you've sorted out the lows, the next step is about the highs. So generally for adults, it's less than 25%. And then for those that are high risk, it's anything sort of less than 50%. And if the percentage is sort of too high, we want to find out why exactly. So is it snacking without taking insulin? Is it miscalculated carbohydrates? Is it injecting after meals? It could be a variety of things as well. Is it injection sites as well? Then step 5 is, well, what about the wide? So once you sort out the low, then it's the high, and then it's the wide. So wide is all about glycemic variability. So how high or low is it at a certain time of the day? So you're seeing the picture there. That's generally what we consider quite a good glycemic variability. It's quite thin and narrow. So the wider it is, that wider that colour, the wider the glycemic variability. And that's measured on a thing called coefficient variation, which is the percentage of CV. So generally you want it less than 36%. So the higher the number, the more glycemic variability. The reasons why we could have glycemic variability really vary, and more often than not, it's usually down to kind of behavior habits as well. So it could be or miscalculated doses and injection site issues, but it could be exercise related, it could be snacking, it could be injecting at the wrong time, it could be over treating a hypo. So basically having the narrower the gap, the better, but by reducing those lows, reducing those highs will help to reduce and then step 6, which is the final one, is, well, what's the plan? Making us smart. So a specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely goal can help. The fewer the goals, the better. You don't want to have too many, because you won't achieve them all. You want to have a goal that's realistic for you. Then follow things up, even if it's your own goal. Follow up 2 weeks later, see what it's like after 14 or even 7 days, and then see, did you achieve what you wanted? And if not, why not? And then go and make another plan as well. And that concludes the end of this first Diabetes Chat presentation.
That was absolutely insane, Dylan. Thank you so much.